deficit.
If foreigners stay worried, they could sell off more U.S. holdings, and then
our inflation rate would shoot up, our interest rates would shoot way into double digits, and we could have a sharp drop into recession.
What's bothering the markets is this.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Mr. Bush has proposed tax breaks and new programs costing more than $10 billion a year. The crises in the savings and loan and nuclear weapons industries will add another $70 billion to the deficit. Not many people think he can avoid taxes.
By 2-to-1, Congress is blamed for these deficits.
His campaign attacks have led the Democrats to warn that they will not go along with taxes unless Mr. Bush goes first.
Keep hope alive! Keep hope alive!
The Democrats have their own where do they go from here question to answer as the two wings of the party get ready to duke it out.
What happens in 89 and 90 would have an awful lot to do about what our options ought to be for 91 and 92. At this point, my commitment is to be a part of a leadership.
With just 15% of the voters calling themselves liberal, why shouldn't the Democrats move in another direction? We'll ask the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Can the deficit be cut without taxes? We'll ask the ranking Republican on the Senate Budget Committee, Pete Domenici, and House Majority Leader Thomas Foley. George Bush and the Democrats. Who will control the agenda? An issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation.
Face the Nation, Reverend Jackson. How are you? You're kind of hoarse.
It's evidence of hard work.
I want to ask you about a news story this morning. In Algeria, the PLO Council has agreed to adopt Resolution 242 from the United Nations, which is an implicit recognition of the State of Israel. It is not explicit, however, which is something the United States, the Reagan administration has asked for, nor did the Council renounce the use of violence or terrorism. How do you interpret what they did, and what would you like to see the United States government do in response?
Well, first of all, it ought to be an explicit recognition of Israel's right to exist and support of Israel's right to secure borders. But it is a step in the right direction. The fact of the matter is the political initiative is much more welcome than any kind of military initiative. And there must be some movement toward mutual recognition. And America ought to play some role in facilitating that process. To see the PLO move toward a political solution, the diplomatic initiative is in great contrast to many previous moves, and we ought to encourage it.
How could we encourage it if it's not enough, if even you say it's
not
enough?
Well, certainly to make the implicit recognition explicit, certainly to appeal to Israel to respond to it, the diplomatic response, and not a military repressive response. Because at some point in time, clearly, we must move from eye for eye and tooth for tooth and death and destruction to diplomatic initiative for diplomatic initiative. 8 years after the Iran-Iraq war, we learned really two things. A, the fertility of war, and B, that direct negotiations are certainly much more effective than any kind of long, protracted war and killing.
But you are really calling on the PLO to take one more step.
Well, certainly, but I'm also appealing to our own country and to Israel to help facilitate that process, because after all, the dynamic we see is that there are forces within the PLO says no to a diplomatic initiative, no to a political initiative, and we ought to encourage. I remember the rationale for taking the cake in the Bible to Iran. We ought to encourage the moderate element within Iran to move toward us, to move toward recognition, to move toward releasing hostages. And so facilitating, using our strength to encourage those forces that are for diplomacy and politics rather than violence and war is a legitimate role for us to play.
Okay, let's move on. I know that when George Bush won the election that you had a phone conversation with him. I know you called to congratulate him. Do you have any reason to believe that he will be that he will change policy from Ronald Reagan's policy toward American blacks, toward affirmative action, toward some of the actions that the Reagan administration has taken that blacks have said have made them feel alienated from that administration?
We've seen two signals. One signal was the manipulation of the Willie Horton ad, which conjured up the worst of fears in white Americans and created more danger for black Americans. Hopefully, that signal will not prevail. The other signal, a kinder, a gentler, and a safer nation. If that is the pursuit, then Democrats and Republicans ought to find common ground. That is, if kind and gentler means prenatal care for women and daycare for children and raising minimum wage for workers and civil rights restoration for all, and he says he wants to be an education president.
Did he talk about civil rights?
Well, not in that brief conversation. I called
or
Governor
even on the
Dukakis,
stump?
and I called him.
Did he ever talk about civil rights?
Well, he talked about being an education president. He talked about daycare. He has some recognition of the impact of the growing number of homeless and those who need health care. And so as Reagan would talk about harder and harder and richer, Bush now talks about kinder, gentler, and safer. And of course, he won by such a small margin in the sense that there are now more Democratic governors and congresspeople and senators. His coattails are short as a waiter's jacket. So there is a kind of balance of power between the Congress and the White House. Hopefully that can be a common ground agenda come January. And together this Congress ought to be able to move on daycare and Head Start and equal rights for women and affordable health care.
Well, I want to ask you something about the result of the election. Why is it that Southern candidates like White Fowler and Dick Shelby and Terry Sanford can put together coalitions in the South to win elections, biracial coalitions, but Northern Democrats who run for president can't seem to be able to do that? The Dukakis ticket was basically nowhere in the South. Why is that?
Well, it's a bit strange because they really argued to have the ticket balanced regionally. The DLC wanted to form an organization and raise money. They did. They wanted Super Tuesday. They got it. They wanted a platform that would not overcommit us. They wanted a convention that would be healed with an agenda that appealed to progressives and conservatives. I attempted to put forth a commitment to common ground. And though we left Atlanta, therefore, with Lord Benson on the ticket and a 17-point lead with great appeal to the South. A, because Benson was on the ticket, Senator Benson, but also because the issues that were being raised in Atlanta, Georgia. The South, for example, 13 million Southerners with no health insurance. Half of all the nation's poor children are in the South. And it seems to me if we had run more at the South, legitimate needs, fair prices for farmers and better wages for workers, as opposed to reacting to the flag test.
But wait a minute. What about those candidates who win in the South? What do they do that's different than Dukakis did? What is it that allows a Southern politician to win a coalition and therefore win elections?
Maybe they count well, and maybe they're not so cynical about black-white relations. Clearly, in the South in 1986, the only way that Senator Sanford and Fowler, Heflin, and Shelby and Brough could win was to have a combination of black and white voters whose interests converged.
What did they do?
And they worked for the coalition. And they worked in ways that they had an agenda that was exhilarating to black and white, but demeaning to neither. When you go south and speak of cleaning up toxic waste dumps and better pay for workers and fair prices for farmers and good education for all of our children and prenatal care for all women, that is a common ground agenda. And that's why I use that theme in Atlanta, because being sensitive to the racial divisions in our country, at what point do we find where lions and lambs can both lay together and neither are afraid? Is our economic security.
Let me ask you about what everybody assumes is going to be a battle between the two wings of the Democratic Party, starting with who's going to be the party chairman, a decision that has to be made soon. Would you support the idea of the current chairman, Paul Kirk, staying in this job to avoid this battle, or do you think it's a battle that must be waged and it's better to wage it early than late?
I think the use of battle is very, hype language to some extent. I talked with Paul Kirk on Wednesday. He called me to congratulate me for the work I had done. I thanked him, and then I asked him, are you going to run again? He said, I promised I would run for one term, and now I am preparing to move back to private life. He said, some have asked me, and I've given them a respectful hearing, but I'm going to honor my agreement. Well, thus, I assume that it's an open situation now. And perhaps it would be just as well to, in January, to have a smooth transition to a new administration.
But on another broadcast this morning, he seemed to suggest that he would be willing to stay on to keep peace.
Those are mixed signals. I asked him point blank, did he want to run again? He said he had run his one term and he was now looking to do something else.
So you would prefer to see somebody else. What if it were Jim Jones, the person that the sort of conservative wing of the party is pushing at this point?
Well,
could you live with him as party chairman?
Well, I did not know him very well in a political sense. I have great respect for him. His name has surfaced. Ron Brown's name has surfaced. Attorney Ron Brown was deputy chair for 4 years, general counsel of the DNC for a year. He helped to manage Senator Kennedy's campaign as a deputy chair in Warren, California in 1980.
He
helped to
seen
manage
as your
my
man.
chair. Well, the fact is he worked with Senator Kennedy longer than he worked with me. But his work with Senator Kennedy, with labor, with women, with Jesse Jackson, over a long period of time, gives Ron Brown substantial Democratic Party credentials. I think that the battle should not come over right wing or left wing. I think it takes two wings to fly, and we ought to continue to protect the broad-based Democratic Party and not get trapped arguing about wings.
Well, who do you want for chairman?
Well, to me, the issue is not yet a who, but a what. And that what is our agenda. Because clearly when we put forth to our nation in Atlanta the idea that we had to run on real issues of a $155 billion budget deficit, $175 billion trade deficit, a $2.2 trillion debt, that we had to run for things real.
But I have to ask you quickly, because we've already run out of time. Who do you want? You seem to be suggesting you want Ron Brown because he more represents those agenda items that you
Well, certainly if there is a new chairperson, if Paul Kirk honors his commitment, Ron Brown's credentials are
could you
substantial
accept
credentials.
Paul Kirk if he agreed to stay on? Would you go to him and say, please stay on?
Oh, I would not appeal to him to stay on, but certainly...
If he said he would stay on?
But at the appropriate time, we need to look at those persons who are considering it. I am, frankly, far less interested at this point in what may happen in February about the DNC than I am, and I'm making our commitment to keep hope alive. What's missing now is we may have to pay $60 to $100 billion to bail out savings and loans. What's missing is 3 to 5 million homeless people. And I might add, this coming Tuesday, 90,000 family farmers will get a foreclosure notice.
You have to say yes or no, if you will. Would you go along and accept Paul Kirk if he agreed to stay on for another term?
Oh, I cannot say yes or no to that. Okay. I can say yes to fighting for those 90,000 family farmers who will be getting a notice 1 week after the election, this coming Tuesday. To me, that's real.
Okay. Reverend Jackson, thank you for being our guest. We are going to be discussing the deficit when we come back.
I'll do my level best to reach out and work constructively with the United States Congress.
Pete Domenici of New Mexico, ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, and Congressman Tom Foley of Washington, House Majority Leader. I want to ask you both the same question. Is it possible to get the budget down by $30 billion, which is required under the Graham-Rudman Agreement, without cutting taxes? Now, I'll start with you, Senator Domenici, because you're the Republican, and this is what George Bush says he'd like to do.
Well, let me make this point first. I'm not at all impressed with the frenzy of Wall Street and the money changers. They're running around as if Vice President Bush, who I believe has a mandate, and I think he will carry it out, and I think we're going to help him. They're running around acting as if some living human being could have solved this one problem, the deficit, in 10 days. You know, my message to them is it's going to get solved. But it's not going to get solved next week or next month. In my opinion, that's an extraordinary expectation. I think it'll get solved about July or August. No quick economic summit, and it will get solved when the Congress and the President are serious about confrontation of a Gramm-Rudman sequester.
I want to ask Congressman Foley the same question, but I have to come to you and say,
sure, I'll answer
he went around in campaign saying no new taxes.
That's right.
The assumption being that he knew he could do it without taxes, but he won't ever say how. And a lot of people think he can't do it without taxes. Why isn't it his responsibility to come forward and assure everybody that he can do, that there is a way to do it, and that it's a way that Congress can go along with, because President Reagan kept sending budgets up to the hill, but they were unrealistic.
Well, I'll make my point. I don't know that he has to submit one that Congress has to go along with. I think we have to decide whether Congress wants to go along with deficit reduction by eliminating and reforming a number of programs, or whether they want taxes. I believe... Let me just give you some. Export-Import Bank. I've been working on this 8 years.
How much?
Appalachia Regional,
wait,
$300 million. About $2 billion.
What's $2 billion?
Export-Import direct loans.
Over how many years is $2 billion?
1 year.
Okay.
Appalachia Regional Commission, about 80 or 90 million. EDA, about 300 million. UDAG, about 150 million. Mass transit operating subsidies, somewhere between 200 and 400 million. Amtrak subsidies, 600 million. See, I think you've got to choose between that big litany.
What does that add up to? About
Well, I didn't go through them all. We have 2,000 American programs. We've got rid of 2 during the Reagan administration.
I think that's about $3.5 billion at the outside, which is important, but it's not obviously sufficient to deal with what was required in the deficit. Let me make 2 points.
Please.
First of all, you cannot, in my judgment, raise taxes if anybody wanted to without the involvement of the President of the United States. Not just a kind of reluctant acceptance, but the involvement of the President. If George Bush, as President of the United States, wants to say no new taxes, there will be no new taxes.
Well, he said it.
He said it.
So there'll be no new taxes.
And the Democrats are not going to go pounding on the door begging the President to change his mind on that and raise taxes. Nor are we going to push legislation toward him so he can veto it, because never in American history, as far as I know, has a veto of a President on a tax bill ever been overridden by the Congress.
So what happens?
So what happens is that the President will submit, I assume, President-elect, a budget which shows how he can meet the targets. Well, it was said, I know, this morning on one of the other programs by Craig Fuller that there would just be immediate negotiations.
Right.
But in those immediate negotiations, if they do take place, the Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, will be interested in knowing what the President proposes. What is the broad outline of his recommendation? We have to see the overall picture before we can know how the pieces fit.
Let me also say, you all are running around talking about the foreigners as if they're saying he must be for new taxes or we're going to cop out on the American economy. I don't think you all know what you're talking about. They got to give him 3, 4, 5 months to work with this Congress to put together a 4-year deficit reduction package. And they just wait around. It's going to happen.
But is he going to come up with the proposal and say, here is something that we must negotiate? Or is he just going to go up there and say, I don't have any idea what to do, help me out?
Oh, I don't think there's any question he's going to have a lot of ideas. Just give him a little time.
Like that? That's $3.5 billion.
Maybe many more, and maybe some innovative approaches. Well, let's wait and see. He's the president-elect.
But that's the problem. You know, the governor of Texas, Mr. Clements, ran for office promising no new taxes and said he had a secret plan. And what happened? He didn't have a secret plan.